Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot Daf Nun. Today's daf is sponsored by Jennifer and Daniel Gerritz in loving memory of Sheila Gerritz, Alea Shalom, whose third yahrzeit is today. And we're going to start our daf, continuing with the takanot of Usha. Okay, we saw there were two takanot we saw yesterday. One, that a person should feed his daughters and sons when they're young, although we said we don't hold that way. And the second thing we saw was a person who writes all of his possessions go to his children in his lifetime. The children have to sustain him and the mother. But in the end, again, we saw that the law does not follow the takana of Usha. The third halacha, Amar Rabbi Il'ah, be'usha itkinu, hamivazbez al yivazbez yoter michomesh. If you're going to, okay, here it seems to say waste your money, but it doesn't really mean waste your money. It means if you're going to give away your money, well, don't give away more than a fifth. Okay, it's why? What's the issue? Right? Because obviously, right, Tanya Nami Hachi, as the Braita supports this, it says, "Hamivazbez al yivazbez yoter michomesh shema yitztarech labriot." You shouldn't waste more than a fifth because you might end up needing the money. Okay, you'll end up having to collect charity yourself. So it seems to indicate that you shouldn't give away to charity more than a fifth of what you have. Now, there's a debate about, do we mean a fifth of what you own, a fifth of what you make? There's all sorts of ways that this is a little bit narrowed down. Okay, we're going to see in the end, they do seem to hold like this. First of all, the Braita supports it, and we're going to see nobody goes against this. And soon we're going to see what their proof is. But the idea here is that there's a little bit of limitations on this, okay? Whereas, for example, if there's a famine and there's a great need, then you're allowed to. Some people say this is only in your lifetime because al yitzarech labriot is so that you don't need charity, whereas in death, you can give away all your money if you want, or you can give away as much as you want. And it seems, right, so there's a bunch of different ramifications of this. There's a good footnote in the Koren, which I wanted to which pointed out that the Rambam, I didn't have a chance to look at it, but that it appears from the Rambam that it's recommended that one give 1/5, that we take this as not an obligation, but it's a good idea to give away 1/5 of your money to charity. Also, that points out there that the Rivan holds that while that maybe this is referring to one who dedicates things to the temple, but when it comes to charity, actually, it's very pious to give away more than 1/5. So it's all different issues about how literally we take this. Anyway, let's go on in the Gemara. Now they're going to give a story or a situation that was he wanted to give away more, but his friend wouldn't let him. Umanu, who is this who prevented him from doing this? Rabbi Yeshevav. Some people say it was Rabbi Yeshevav, Umanu Rabbi Akiva. It was Rabbi Yeshevav who actually wanted to give away more money, but then Rabbi Akiva stopped him. Where do we get this from? The verse, from a verse in the Torah. Where do we see this halacha? This is Yaakov. It says, everything God gives me, I will give 1/10 of it to him. Aser asrenu, though, we normally understand the simple reading is we give 1/10, and that's why most people think you give 1/10 of your money to tzedakah and not a fifth. And until you saw this Gemara, aser asrenu is a double language, though, so it means 1/10 and 1/10, which is a fifth. To which they say, "V'halo dami isura batra l'isura kama." But what do you mean? If it's double of 1/10 twice, so first you take 1/10, and then 1/10 of that is not 1/10 plus 1/10, right? It's 1/10 plus 9/10 of what you had before, which actually isn't a fifth. To which Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, to which the Amar Rav Ashi, Asrenu lebatra ki kama. What it meant is, I'm going to take 1/10, just like the first 1/10 that I took, and not 1/10 of what was left, but 1/10. It's not like I took 2/10 of what I had, but 2/10 from the beginning, right? 1/10, and then exactly that same amount twice, which would add up to a fifth. So that's the third takana of Usha, to which the Gemara says, Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Ushmuot halalu mitma'atot v'olchot. And I pointed this out yesterday, that these teachings get less and less and less. What happens? First, we had Rabbi Ilah, who said in the name of Rish Lakish, who said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina. Then we have Rabbi Ilah, who said the name of Rish Lakish, and the third one was just passed down the name of Rabbi Ilah. So they're telling you that each one was passed down by less of, passing down in the name of this one and the name of that one. Not sure why that's so significant that they want to tell us this, but simanech, how do you remember this? And how do you remember the order? Ktanim katvu ubizbizu, which literally means young ones wrote and wasted. Okay, but what it really is a mnemonic to remember Ktanim, which is feeding your children, right? The obligation to sustain your children who are minors. The next one is Katvu, they wrote, right? Which is the father who writes all of his nechasim all of his possessions to his children. And the third is Bizbizu, about wasting your money or spending too much money on charity. Rav Yitzchak, so that's the end of Rabbi Ilah, who passed down a bunch of ordinances that they instituted in Usha. Now we're going to get a few more, but other people are going to bring them. Rav Yitzchak, ב"אושה התקינו שהאדם מתגלגל עם בנו עד 12 שנה, מכאן ואילך יורד עמו לחייו. In Usha, they established that a person should go with the flow. Okay, that's the way Rashi understands this, with his son until he's 12, meaning try to teach him, but gently. מכאן ואילך יורד עמו לחייו. But if it doesn't work, he can go into his life, which doesn't really mean that. What it means is he can use any means necessary to get his son to study. Right, Rashi brings the old school of thought, which is liridoto b'ritzuah. You can whip him if you need to, u'b'choser lechem, and not feed him if he's not studying properly. The Aruch has a whole different interpretation here, that it doesn't mean mitgalgel in beno if he doesn't learn. What it means is until the age of 12, he can let his son study. After that, he has to teach him a trade. Yoredim olachayav means teach him something that's going to help him to survive. Right, and not just study, but learn a trade. So it's a whole different interpretation of this Gemara. But we're going to go with Rashi, to which the Gemara says, "Ini, is that really true?" Rav Shmuel bar Shilat, b'tzirmi bar shit lo tekabel, bar shit kabel v'safi lekatol. Less than 6 don't accept him to study, because we're going to see later that they were concerned that young children, if they began to study at a young age, by the way, notice this 6-year cutoff is like we talked about the food. It's an obligation to feed your children until age 6. After that, the children can start to fend for themselves. Again, better to feed them, but you don't have to. So under 6, we're worried the children are too weak to start studying. They might get weaker if they study. But at 6, you can accept them, and you can force it on them like the way you force feed your animal. Right? Specifically, it's talking about ox. So here you see, you're already forcing them at age 6, not at age 12. To which the Gemara says, "In Safele Ketorah, mi weno yoredim al chayav al achar 12 shana." He says, no, those are 2 different things. Forcing them to learn is one thing. That you do from 6 to 12. But yoredim al chayav, which is already, you can whip him or do something more serious, like don't give them food to eat if they don't study, that only from the age of 12. Or alternatively, you could say there's a difference between what you're teaching them. Teaching them, the Torah, that already from age 6, you could start to force them. Whereas Mishnah, only at the age of 12. Damar Abaye, as Abaye said, Amr li'em, my mother told me, which is not his mother, but the woman who took care of him after his mother died. Bar shit lemikra, bar eser lemishnah. Okay, 6 is the age you start learning Torah. 10 is the age you start learning Mishnah. This doesn't exactly match the 12, but you can understand you only start learning Mishnah at a later age, and that's why we only start enforcing it at 12. Bar tleisar latanita, within the 13th year, which means 12 and a day, to fast May la'eit. For boys, that's the age where you should start fasting a full day. Ubetinoket, and in girls, bar tresa, at the age of 12, which means the beginning of the 12th year, which is when she's 11 and a day. Amar Abaye. So Rashi says an interesting thing here, and this gets back. We're going to see this a few times about the strength issue. He says, why girls at a younger age, right? We normally just think, girls are bat mitzvah, boys are bar mitzvah at different ages, but why the different age in terms of when they fast? Rashi says, Shehi memaheret lavi koch. She is stronger. Interesting. We always think of boys are physically stronger. Well, apparently she's stronger. Why? She'ena mateshet koch b'limud Torah. Okay, we say she doesn't get weakened by learning Torah. There seemed to be this concept. That's what we were saying before, that they get weakened when they learn Torah, and we're going to see it further on also. Why that is a good question, maybe because you're spending a lot of energy on learning Torah. That would be the simple understanding. I was thinking also maybe because when you're sitting reading books, you're not as physically active. And when you're physically active, so your body strengthens. If you start too early, just sitting and learning, and you stop being physically active, your body might get weaker. The girls were always physically active, not just because they were maybe playing around and doing physical stuff, but also they were carrying the water from the well and doing all sorts of physical, right? Doing the laundry, all of that was physical labor. And maybe because of that, they were stronger than the boys were. It's very interesting to think about. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, Ama Abai, Amra Li'em. Okay, now we're going to have all sorts of strange or sounding things. And this, the Gemara, if you remember in Brachot and some other Gemaras had these type of things. Amra Abai, Amra Li'em. Okay, since he was mentioning things, the woman who took care of him told him, Hi Barshit de Tarkele Akraba biyoma de Mishlam Shit lo chaye. If you get bitten by a scorpion on the day of your 6th birthday, you will not survive. By a sute. So what's the remedy? If you remember, the Gemara talks about all sorts of remedies. So some sources that said, don't try these at home. We're not supposed to believe these remedies anymore. The rabbis mentioned them. They're not relevant today. They don't really work. Anyway, this is a very strange one. Marerata didaya chivarta, take the bile of a white vulture. B'shichra, mix it with beer. Nishvie v'nishkie, rub it on your body. And then, where the bite was, and then drink it, okay, or have the child drink it. Hi bar shata, the tarech lezi bore biyoma de mishlam shata lochaya. If a 1-year-old who on the day turns 1 gets a bite from a hornet, will not survive. Maya sute, what do we do to remedy this? Atzvata de dikla, you take the fibers from the date palm tree. B'maya, you mix them in water. V'nishke, and again, rub it on your body and drink it. And that will resolve the problem. Again, very strange sounding remedies. I don't have so much to add about this. Amar Rav Katina, kol machnisah b'no pachot mi ben 6, ratz acharav ve'eno migiyo. If you're bringing your son to study, younger than the age of 6, you will chase after him, and you will not, ratz acharav, he will chase, how do we translate this? Right, you'll run after him to try to strengthen him. Rashi says, lahavroto, lachioto, to help him survive, but it won't work, as he's going to be very weakened by this. Some people say, it's not father's trying to run after him to try to save him. It's that the friends will try to run after him and they will never catch up to him, meaning he got such a young start learning that he's in a great position. He's going to be much smarter than everybody else. So that seems like a total contradiction, to which the Gemara says, Utravayu itanu, both of these are true. Chalish vigamir. Number 1, it weakens you, but number 2, it makes you smarter. So physically you'll be weaker, but actually you'll end up being smarter. So both those things are true. Or the Gemara says, alternatively, you could say, hadikhish hadibari. Could depend on if you're weak, then it will really weaken you, and it will maybe even cause you, right, to be so weak you won't be able to survive. Whereas if you're healthy, then it actually makes you better than, in a better position than your friends. Okay, than other people. Tov, next. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, be'usha yitkinu, another takana b'usha. We're up to number 5. Haisha shemachra b'nichsei melog, bechaye ba'ala umeta, a woman who sells her nichsei melog. Let's talk about nichsei melog again. Nichsei melog, there's nichsei melog, there's nichsei tzom barzel. These are things that the woman brings into the marriage. So she brings in, these are, let's say, property. Okay, we're going to talk about this. It's mainly property that is owned by her. The husband gets the proceeds during her lifetime. If he dies, it goes back to her exactly as it was. Or if he divorces her, she gets it exactly, whatever state it is. Now she gets it back. Okay, so if she had a field that was this size, she gets back the field that size. Doesn't matter if it went up in value, went down in value. But if she dies first, he inherits it. So in this case, the woman sold. Now, even though he only has rights to the proceeds, right, to the fruits of it, but he doesn't have rights to the actual field itself. So she theoretically could sell it. So if she sells it, bechaye ba'ala, when he's still alive, umeta, and then she dies first, and he was supposed to inherit it, So theoretically, by law, she sold it. He didn't actually have rights to the principal. He only had rights to the proceeds. And yes, in her death, he was supposed to inherit it, but not if she sells it in the interim. But in Usha, they established that no, Habal motzi miyad halekucha. He can get it back from anyone that she sold it to. So if she sold, now you have to remember, when she sold it to someone, she didn't sell them the rights to the proceeds while she was still alive. What she basically was selling them were the rights to get it in the event that she dies. So basically, in the Usha, they said this sale is not valid, and he can claim it back because he, in essence, has rights to it as well. Okay, and they gave him rights like as if he was someone who had purchased it from her, and therefore he can get it back from those who she sold it to. The Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef saw Rabbi Abau that he was in a big group of people in Usha. Amar le man mara dishmata Usha. So he asked him, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef asked Rabbi Abau, who's the one who said this in Usha? Amar le Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. So he said, it was him who said it. So after he heard this, he learned it 40 times so that it would be, he'd have it, could just pull it out and know it well. So we reviewed this 40 times. Now, whether he reviewed that it was Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina who taught it, that was what he reviewed 40 times to remember, or once he heard that he was the one who taught it, then he reviewed the takana and what it was and what it meant 40 times so that he'd know it for sure. Okay, so that was the 5th takana we saw in Usha. The first 2 weren't accepted for halacha purposes. It seems like the other 3, we haven't seen any disagreement about them. It seems as they were accepted. Now we're going to have a bunch of verses. Ashrei shomrei mishpat oset tzedakah b'chol eit. Happy is the one who keeps the law, keeps law, oset tzedakah b'chol eit, and does charity all the time. To which the Gemara asks, how could you give charity all the time? You'll end up with no money if you give charity all the time. Going back to a person who gives away more money than he can. The rabbis in Yavne said, Rabbi Eliezer, some people say it was Rabbi Eliezer who said it. Now we go back to the first takana busha. If you feed your children when they're young, that's basically, right, when they're minors, that's basically doing tzedakah all the time, because you're always giving them. First of all, you're not obligated, so it could be considered like tzedakah, and it's a charitable deed you're doing every single day, so that you can keep up doing. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amal, if you write like fostering children, if you take in an orphan and you marry them off, that's doing tzedakah all the time, because you're constantly helping someone who clearly needs your help. And your children, that's not really charity, according to this opinion. But taking in somebody else from the street, right, who needs your help, that's someone who's doing tzedakah all the time. He has a house full of wealth, and his generosity stands forever. Okay, now, again, the question is, how could you possibly have extreme wealth and you're constantly giving things away? Doesn't really seem to work. Again, we know it could work, but the Gemara seems to say this isn't something certainly you can expect of everybody. Maybe it's unique. Someone who's super wealthy won't be able to do that kind of thing. But, the average person, if they're constantly giving away their money, they're not going to have a lot of wealth at home. So what could this possibly mean? Again, we're going to have 2 explanations. Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda, one who learns Torah and teaches it, because you don't lose your Torah when you teach it. It actually strengthens your Torah. You end up with a lot of wealth because your Torah that you teach, first of all, I think the Torah you teach, when you teach it, you remember it much better than if you just learn it. So in a sense, you're full of wealth because you've done that, and you teach it to others, so you're giving to other people at the same time. And it doesn't take away from the wealth that you have, and like I said, it even strengthens it. Someone who writes Sifrei Torah, Nevi'im U'Ktuvim, and he lends them out to people. So he still has his wealth, but he's able to give things to others as well. If you see sons to your sons, there will be peace in Israel. What does this mean? Once you have sons for your own sons, there will be peace in Israel, because your sons won't come to have to do chalitza or yibum. Your sons' children won't have to do chalitz or yibum, and that will bring peace. Why will that bring peace? Because one of the reasons could be potentially because chalitza, first of all, is someone's not doing what they're supposed to do, and people in the family will get angry at them. Or yibum could be they're fighting over who gets to do yibum, the different brothers, because they'll each want to inherit the other brother, so they might want to each do yibum, cause fighting. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar kashem shabarim levanecha shalom al dagenei Yisrael telo ati li'insuye. Once your sons have sons, there will be peace for the judges, because the judges won't have to get involved in these fights between family members. If you have no sons, or your sons don't have sons, then when your sons die, all the brothers will fight over all the relatives will fight over who gets to inherit. Whereas once they're sons, it's very clear who inherits, and therefore there won't be as much fighting. Okay, going back now to the Mishnah. If you remember, he compared the ketubah of the boys, the boys inherit and the girls get food, just like the boys inherit only after the death of the father. Likewise, the girls only get food after the death of the father, and the father doesn't have to sustain the daughters while he's alive. So Yativ Rav Yosef came to Rav Hamnuna, Yativ Rav Hamnuna Bakama. Okay, Rav Yosef went in front of Rav Hamnuna, and Rav Hamnuna said, Kashem she'en banim yorshim elam min hakalka, kach en banot nizanot elam min hakarka. Just like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah made that drasha, the boys, we're going to compare the boys and the girls. He says the same thing. The boys only inherit from the land of the father. Hold off in a minute. We're going to say, what are you talking about? They also inherit the movable property. But right now, sounds like just like the boys only inherit from the land of the father, the girls can only get food from the land, meaning if the father doesn't own any land and there's just movable property, they won't be able to get food from that, like sell the movable property in order to feed them. So after Rav Hamnuna said this, everybody got all upset. Remember, it started with Rav Yosef was sitting in front of Rav Hamnuna, and Rav Hamnuna said the following drasha, to which everyone started saying, what are you talking about? If you leave over land, that's when your sons inherit. But sons won't inherit your movable property. Well, who's going to get your movable property if not the sons? To which Amalei Rav Yosef, who was standing by listening, he said, and this is actually what we said the Mishnah was referring to. The Ketubot Banim Dichrin, if you remember, Banim Dichrin means Banim Scharim, the male children, was that the woman, when she gets her Ketubah, she's promised that whatever her Ketubah is worth, meaning the 200 zuz, plus any additional, plus all the property that she brings into the marriage, in the event that the husband doesn't die first or doesn't divorce her, and she gets it, in the event that she dies first, it goes to the husband. And when the husband then dies, all of the ketubah will go to her sons and not be split equally among his sons, He might have sons from other marriages. So Rabbi Yosef said, maybe we're talking about the ketubah b'nin dichrin, which is based on the ketubah, and the ketubah is connected with land. The ketubah can be taken from land, not normally from movable property. To which Amar Lei, Mar de Gavra Rabbahu Yada Mai Kamina. He said, wow, Rav Yosef, Rav Hamnuna says, wow, you're such a great man that you understood exactly what I was referring to, and you defended me in front of everybody else. Okay, so in the end, yes, the sons inherit things that aren't land, but the point is the Ketubah B'nin Dichrin and the commitment in the Ketubah that the girls will get food, that is all only going to be from land. Okay, this is going to be a big issue that we're going to discuss for the next while, both in the rest of today's daf and tomorrow's daf. Is this really true that the girls can only get food from land? And if the father, let's say, doesn't have any land, then they can't claim food from, to sell the movable property in order to give them food. So this, Rav Hamnuna definitely seems to say they can't. Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef, Rav zan michitei aliyah. Rav gave these girls food, it sounds like. We'll see what zan means in a minute. From chitim, of the aliyah, from wheat, which is movable property, of the aliyah. So we don't know what aliyah means. Ibayli, to which the Gemara asks two things we don't really understand. One is parnasa havya. When it said zan, does it mean parnasa? Parnasa, we usually mean food, but no, like your livelihood. What he means here is the dowry. Was it money for their dowry? Because the girls also need money for their dowry to get married. So were we talking about the dowry? Again, we're talking about girls whose father died. So they took money from the dowry. Umay aliyah. What does it mean, aliyah? Mi iluya da'av. From what we assess the highest amount the father would have given to the daughter. We try to kind of get into his head, were he alive, how much would he have given? And that's the most that we give. Uchid Shmuel, and as Shmuel says, Da'amar Shmuel, leparnasah shamim ba'av. When it comes to parnasah, which is the dowry, we assess what we think the father would have given. O Dilma, or maybe it means mizone mamash haba. Maybe they really mean food. And then my aliyah. So what does aliyah mean then? Midvarim tovim shenemru aliyah. From good words that were said in the aliyah, which is the second floor. And often they had these meetings in the aliyah. It comes up a lot. To Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef ba'aliyah hitkinu. In the aliyah, they established sheyehu banot nizonot min hamataltalin. They established that girls can get sustenance against what Rav Hamnuna said from movable property. So that's the second option of what Rav Chiya bar Yosef said here about Rav Zami Chitei Daliyah. Okay, so according to this, Rav, the second interpretation, Rav actually allows the girls to be sustained from movable property. So Tashma, let's try to get the answer from here because they gave two possibilities. We don't know which is right. In the hands of Rabbi Banai, who was the brother of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, there was metaltalin of the Yitomim. There were movable possessions of these orphans, meaning he was an apitropos. He was in charge of their money, the guardian. Atu the Kamei de Shmuel. The girls came in front of Shmuel and say, we want to get food from here. Amarle zilzun. So Shmuel said, go get money from here for your food. My lav lemizone. Again, now what does zun mean? We assumed it means food. And then Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, and then it sounds like he holds like Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, who said we can give the girls food from movable property against Rav Hamnuna. To which the Gemara says, look, not necessarily. And then this doesn't answer the question about Rav, who was Zami Chitei Da'aliyah, which would seem he gave them food. No, it could mean leparnasah have u'shmuel l'ta'ameh da'amar Shmuel leparnasah shamim ba'av. Could be this means the other option, which is Shmuel. First of all, they asked Shmuel and Shmuel gave the answer. And we already learned that Shmuel says for parnasah, for the dowry, you can give from the aliyah, right? So then it seems, right, we're assessed how much the father would have given, and even for movable property. And maybe that's what he was talking about. And then doesn't teach us anything about food. So now we're going to have some more stories. Have a uvda bin Nahardea. There was a case in Nahardea. We don't get the details, but dun dayanei de Nahardea. The dayanim, the judges in Nahardea, gave the girls money from. It doesn't really say the details here, but it seems clear they gave the girls money from movable property. But Pumbedita, same thing. Va'agbe Rav Chana bar Bizna. He also let the girls take money from the movable property. To which Amalu Rav Nachman said to both the judges in Nahardea and this Rav Chana bar Bizna in Pumbedita, he said to them, Zil ahadru, give the money back to the orphans. You took it unnecessary, right, against the law. V'ilo, and if you don't, magbina lechula apandaichu minaichu, I'm going to take your palaces away from you. Meaning, I'm going to make you pay for this if you don't. This is a fascinating halacha. If a judge makes a mistake in the law, we can demand the money from the judges themselves. And basically, he's saying, if you don't return that money to the orphans, you took this money from the orphans, and the girls weren't deserving of it because it was movable property, and you can't give the girls food for movable property, so you better return it right now. He was threatening them to overturn their judgment. Otherwise, I'm going to take it from your pocket. Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, several the two of them also wanted to. You see all this interest in trying to help these girls get food, which makes sense. But right, there were debates about whether they could do this or not. So again, they thought it was okay to give the girls money from the movable property. Amarli Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Milta Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish lo avde ba'uvda, atun avdim ba'uvda. You're trying to do something that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish wouldn't even do, and you're going to do this? Like, no, it's not so clear that you can do this. And again, we can't take money out of someone if it's not clear that we can. Amar the Fanav Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Elazar Savar Lemeza Metaltalin. Rabbi Elazar, who interestingly was a student of Rabbi Yochanan, also wanted to give the girls from the movable property. Amar the Fanav Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim. Rebbe, Yodani b'chashe ein midat adin ata oseh ela midat rachmanut. He says, listen, I understand. And probably he knew that he wasn't going to really think that they're deserving of this because Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't allow it. And he was a student and he always went with Rabbi Yochanan. But he says, I understand that you are feeling merciful for these girls, right? They don't really deserve it, but you feel like it's the right thing to do and you should help take care of them. And presumably it seems like the orphans had enough money and they could afford it. It wasn't like we were putting them out for it. But he says, but be careful, because if you do this, people are going to think that this is the law. And then they're going to take money in other cases where maybe it's not the right thing to do from orphans and give it to the girls to sustain them, to feed them. So be careful what you do, because there will be ramifications in the future. Another interesting thing about judges, we learned a few things, right? That number one, if you make a mistake, well, you might have to pay out of pocket. And number two, we learned that you have to watch what you do, because people will use what you do as an example for future generations. Rav Yosef, another situation happened, last story for today. Amar Lahu, he said to them, right? In other words, again, these girls came looking for food. Havlu mitame da al budya. Give them from the dates that are on the mats. Now, dates on the mats are clearly movable property. Amar le Abai, ilu ba'al chov hava ki agavna mi ayayav leimar. If it was a ba'al chov, someone who was owed money, you wouldn't give him from the movable property. So why are you giving these girls from the movable property? Amar le, you misunderstood. I was talking about ones that are still on the tree, which are considered like land because they're still attached to the tree. And that's what I was telling you to do, not to take ones that are detached. That would be movable. What I meant was when they're not movable. To which the Gemara asks, I'm just going to finish a little into tomorrow's daf. But in the end, anything that's ready to be cut is like it's already cut. So the fact that these were ripe dates that were ready to be on the mat, and as, by the way, I think I didn't explain this clearly. There were ones that were on the tree, but ready to be picked and put on the mats. So to which he said, if they're ready to be picked and put on the mats, it's already as if they're detached and they're not considered land. To which he said, what I meant was ones that are in between. They're ready to go on the mat, but they still are getting nourishment from the tree. They still need the tree to grow even more. So even though they're theoretically, it's kind of an in-between, theoretically ready to be picked, but they also still need the tree. So these that I was referring to specifically are ones that are still considered like land. Okay, so again, you see, it's very interesting, and you can imagine the situation and why they want to do this. There were all these girls who needed to be sustained, and they were trying to get them sustained by their family and not make them go to charity. On the other hand, there's all these criteria, and there's a debate about the criteria. Can you accept from movable property? Can you give them from movable property or not? And it wasn't such a clear-cut thing. There were definitely people who were very against it. On the other hand, there were also people who were for it. So we end up with all these debates and strong kind of pulls in either direction about whether yes or whether no. Anyway, it's a very interesting issue. We're going to continue with this into tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a good day.